Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Beth Cooper Benjamin. I am the Director of Programs and Peer Networks here at the Jewish Funders Network, and we are very pleased to bring you today's program in partnership with our colleagues at SRE Network. We don't often have the opportunity to create programs like this in collaboration, and we actually owe a special thanks today to one of our speakers, Sheila Katz, who graciously uh, pinged us back channel and said, by the way, SRE and JFN, you are both trying to hold the same conversation the same week, and maybe you can do it together, which was a really wonderful invitation
Yeah,
for us to take the opportunity to bring our communities together because obviously we have some pressing priorities and concerns that we all want to discuss. So we're very glad. And obviously you do too, because this is a wonderful turnout today. So thank you again for being with us. I am going to hand the proceedings over to Rachel Gildener from SRE Network. Rachel,
thank
you
you, Beth.
are officially in charge. Take it away.
Okay, a lot of pressure. It's so good to see all of you. Welcome again, as Beth said, to today's conversation. I'm Rachel Gildner. I'm the executive director of SRE Network, and SRE Network advances gender equity within the Jewish community. We work with close to 200 Jewish nonprofits and foundations to help them build workplaces that are safe, respectful, and equitable for women so that they can thrive, lead, and bring their full gifts to address the greatest challenges facing the Jewish community and the world. We are very proud, as Beth said, to be a part of this partnership with JFN to host this very important conversation. One so important that both of us were trying to do it at the same time. And everyone on this call today does work that is striving to change systems. And inherent in systems change is that no one of us can do it alone. So when we're seeing the news of what is happening around us in the world, our election, the following appointments of leadership, the goals set out in certain projects, we started asking questions about how this will inevitably, not if, but how this will impact the work of belonging, protecting women's rights, uplifting Black voices and voices of color within our Jewish community. And what better way to explore these questions than together in conversation and in community and with the experts who can help us guide the way. So we want to thank you all again for being here and for being part of this important dialogue. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to share an overview of the call and our kind of goal for the day. So we're going to hear from Ilana and Sheila in conversation for about 20 minutes. Then we're going to make sure we have some breakout time. So if you can stay near your computer when we go into breakout groups, that will help the conversation. And then we'll make sure that we have time for Q&A. Please do ask questions as we go. You can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand, and we'll make sure we get to as many as we can during our time together. And now I am very excited and grateful to introduce our speakers who are with us today. Ilana Kaufman is the founder and chief executive officer of the Jews of Color Initiative. She helped establish the US-based conversation and communal field for Jews of color. Ilana's work sits at the center of racial justice and Jewish philanthropy, having developed scores of Jews of color led and focused organizations and leaders, and facilitating some of the most important research in the US about Jews of color. Ilana's work strengthens the US Jewish community and, by extension, multiracial and civic relations in the US. Ilana's insights have been shared on NPR, Code Switch, and Eli Talk titled Who Counts? Race and the Jewish Future, and has authored pieces in New York Times, Washington Post, The Forward, and the Foundation Review. Sheila Katz is the CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, NCJW, which advocates working for the full equity and safety of women, children, and families in the United States and Israel. Under Sheila's leadership, NCJW has responded to threats to abortion access, voting rights, childcare access, equal pay, and other issues of equity through protest, advocacy, and new campaigns. Sheila was recently named one of the top 10 faith influencers by Religion News Service and is one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. These two incredibly impressive speakers have also both been teachers, mentors, and colleagues of mine for many years now. And I'm very, very grateful to have you both here and have the chance to learn from you. Thank you for all you do. So we're going to dive in. This is for both of you, but Ilana will have you answer first. In terms of your own strategy for your organizations, how are the election results shaping how you are thinking about your work right now? Ilana, we'll go to you, and then Sheila, you'll have a chance.
First of all, thank you for having me. And it's good to see everybody. Good morning, good midday, good evening. The Jews of Color Initiative is in, I think, both a challenging and wonderful position because we are, by design, non-political in our work. Aside from the fact that we fight racism, which is entirely political, we work very hard to have the work that we do, the access to Jewish communal life, the access to Jewish communal resources, be accessible to as many Jews of color in our multiracial community as possible. And that means folks who have all different kinds of political perspectives and points of view. It means people who might at first blush be in conflict with one another, when really we are interconnected at our root. And sometimes it's very, very hard to see when we are thinking in binary and sometimes conflicting ways. And it also means that our community in the United States as Jewish Americans is feeling, both in some ways empowered, emboldened, and vulnerable all at the same time, which is a very prickly set of dynamics to navigate. And then you add the layers of racial diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, denominational diversity. And so, our work must continue to be focused on whom we're in service to and be, I say, resilient to the political headwinds. That also means that we need to recognize that as the political climate shifts, and for some become emboldened, for some become more vulnerable, we need to be in relationship with and accessible to as many members of our community as possible. And I'll just end by saying I just came home yesterday from a trip starting in North Carolina, moving through South Carolina, and ending up in Florida. And we, as American Jews, have an opportunity to really focus at least part of this moment on, and I don't want to sound Pollyannish, not about what brings us together, because I think that actually flattens the difficulty and the complexity of a politically difficult time. I think we have a responsibility to very strategically and intentionally focus on what our shared organizing principles are across this community, and to figure out what actually pushes us away from being able to organize ourselves around a common point of interest and a common theme. And we need to figure out what kinds of vehicles of mobility will get us centered on those common themes. And we need to be brave enough as an American Jewish community to set aside those pieces that will actually continue to deteriorate the diversity of this community and the strength that brings us together. And so the JOCI is focused on those common organizing principles, and hopefully that will allow us to continue to engage, uplift, and connect, and then be able to sustain the headwinds that want to push us apart.
Thank you, Ilana. Sheila.
Great. Well, first of all, it's so good to be here with everyone and working here with Rachel and Ilana. It's the dream team. So thank you to SRE and JFN for bringing us together. Plus one to what Ilana said, we're thinking about a lot of the same things at National Council of Jewish Women since the election, how to show up in space, who we show up in spaces with. But I guess what I really want to center us in this moment is that things right now, under the current administration we have, in the current situation that we have, which are a lot of people who are considered our allies in the work to fight for a better world for women, children, and families, things right now are pretty bad. I just want to level set. I know they're better than they've been from 100 years ago. If we look back, we're always on a trajectory to get better. But right now, in this minute, right, women are dying because they can't access emergency reproductive health care. Yesterday, we saw another shooting in a school, and I can't name the school for you because I've become so numb to remembering each of these schools, and it bothers me that right now, off the cuff, I can't tell you that name. That's how common shootings are. The #1 cause of death of children and teens in this country is gun violence. And so there is a lot going on for women, children, and families. I'll add in, I'm a proud aunt. I look forward to sharing that everywhere I can and sharing cute pictures of my adorable niece, Layla. My sister, now that I'm following her cost that she has to pay to navigate just childcare alone is her entire salary. And I watch her make this decision to stay in the workforce and use everything towards childcare, which she's able to do because she has a partner who also works, or to leave the workforce and take care of her child. No judgment if somebody wants to do that, but to be forced to do that because 50% of our country doesn't have access to childcare right now. Let's say it again. 50% of our country does not have access to any childcare. And then you add in what's affordable, and that price has gone up and up and up. So we are already in crisis mode. And that is not going to change on January 20th. So we have to make things better for women, children, and families, no matter who is in the government. And we don't know what's going to come. Like, I think a lot of people are talking with certainties. We don't know what is about to come. What I can say is in the next few weeks, there's something that we have to do. And you're going to hear me refer to this multiple times on this call, because just like I try to talk about my niece, Layla, I try to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment as much as possible to normalize this. So what I can say is right now, we need to be pushing President Biden to instruct the archivist to sign the Equal Rights Amendment so that it can be codified in the Constitution. Because one of the issues we have is the reason we have to navigate all of this about not having bodily autonomy, the right to our own health care, marriage equality being on the line again, navigating healthcare for trans youth, etc. Part of the reason, what gets under that, is that A, women are not constitutionally guaranteed equal in our country. And B, the language around being constitutionally guaranteed equal is actually about gender. And so there's protections for the LGBTQ community, including the trans community, including marriage equality. So I feel like so often we're fighting a fight to be on, the defense all the time, instead of simply saying there is something that can get to the heart of this that we can do. It's complicated. We can go into it if people have questions. But legally, right now, President Biden can ask the archivist, first woman, by the way, to sign that and become a constitutional amendment, and then let people try to take it away from us, right? That's going to be the question of whether it would stand, because it's been over 100 years. Is that too long of a time? You know what? The Constitution doesn't instruct that. Let it play out legally. But right now we have a president who cares about this. We have an archivist who says publicly she'll do what the president instructs. And so that's what I really want to tell all of you. We're going to get to what's happening next. But right now, there's so much to push Congress to do. There's so much to push the president to do while we know what the landscape is and who the players are. So you can go, I'll put a link in the chat, like ncjw.org, I think it's /act. So if you take nothing away, we'll talk about what's to come. But right now, we have an opportunity to really use everything we've got. And there are funders on this call. If you have a relationship with President Biden or someone at the White House, today is the day to pick up the phone. He can do it on his last day in office. He could do it anytime between now and then. And so I just am kind of tired in the fight for women's equality and safety and respect and equity of always having to say how I started, of how bad it is, when we have solutions that we can come together and try to fight for together. So, what I can say, no matter what, with a President Trump, a President Biden, or a President anybody else, is that our priorities and our mission remain. We're here to build a better world for women, children, and families where they don't just exist, but can thrive. And we're going to do everything and anything we can to mobilize the Jewish community to fight for often what is left out, to make sure that women, children, and families, those most impacted, and everyone have what they need to be successful.
Thank you both so much. I want to share back some of what I've heard from you both before we go to our next question, which is, Ilana, I think you used the word brave. And Sheila, you mentioned that this is not new, and the future that we are facing will not necessarily be new fights for us doing this work, that this work has been ongoing, that it has taken collective action and brave, bold voices and leadership from you both and many others to advance this work, and that this moment in time, while we're facing an unknown, is also a moment that so many have been working towards and trying to make the world better. And so that strangely gives me a little hope that even though we don't know what's coming, there are people in this work who work every day towards better ends, and just the gratitude for that, and that we're coming from a place of immense strength. What I want to ask you both about now, Ilana, you mentioned this idea of organizing principles, and Sheila, you mentioned this idea of solutions. What are the things that both of your organizations have been doing? What are some of these organizing principles or some of these solutions? Sheila, your example of the ERA, right? We have tools that we know work and will, even as things change around us, we imagine they will work moving forward. So if you can just share, what are some of those organizing principles that you feel like you and your work will be leaning more into as we face an uncertain future? And Sheila, what are some of those solutions that you feel like we also have at our fingertips that we can lean on and really uplift and advance together as we move ahead? Why don't we go with Sheila first?
I was looking at Ilana because I really just like to say what Ilana said. I'm proactively saying what Ilana said. I think, listen, the National Council of Jewish Women is 131 years old. We've been around a lot. We're the oldest Jewish women's organization in the country and one of the oldest Jewish organizations in the country. So there are things we've always done well, and there's things we've learned along the way. And one of the things we've learned along the way that's important to be able to reroute each time is that we have to center the people most impacted. In any issue, there is a wide spectrum of people who are impacted, and there are some people who, laws and policies are directly targeting. And we have found if we can go to the people most impacted, hear their stories, understand their concerns, we actually can do better advocacy for everybody. It's not that it only impacts one group or others. And it's important as a historic, white organization. And even as I think about the Equal Rights Amendment and things along the way with NCJW, particularly around abortion and Roe v. Wade, who we were centering as certain policies and things were created were not actually centered around Black women who were disproportionately impacted. And as a result, the solutions at the end of the day left a lot of these women out and made it so that when Roe was overturned, for a lot of people, that was deeply, deeply impactful. Of course, millions of people impacted. And for a segment of people in this country, they already didn't have access to abortions. And so I think as we are navigating a very complicated landscape where a lot of people are under threat, understanding the kind of who's impacted and why is going to be essential to organizing. And right now, I'd say, just from what we've heard, I'd say in the campaign, in our future President Trump's campaign and who his administration is, we've heard a lot, particularly around women, bodily autonomy in particular. So we know low-income women of color are going to be most impacted in that, right? If tomorrow I need an abortion, I have the means to go make sure I can do that. And that's important as we think about this. We know that trans youth in particular are impacted. And again, we're going to add low income into that. And we know that immigrants are going to be disproportionately impacted. And that's on top of people of color already disproportionately impacted in this country. So I think particularly for folks on this call thinking about where to invest and how to work with organizations doing change-making work, asking the question of how you're in relationship with the people most impacted, I think is really important because that's what allows us to get it right as we work to really try to change things in the future. And what I'd say with that is the reminder, right? So center those most impacted. And two is that policies impact people. They're not theoretical. Real people every single day, their lives, their bodies, their futures are impacted. And I think it's important we share those stories when we are fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to have them. I think about someone named Amber Thurman, who traveled to North Carolina from Georgia to receive legal abortion care. And she became infected when she returned home. But the Georgia hospital refused to perform a DNC procedure, a very common procedure if you can't naturally miscarry, what's going on, to clear the infected tissue from her uterus. They sat there and debated it. The doctors wanted to do it, but they were worried about going to jail. They had to get clearance from the hospital. Time passed, time passed, time passed, and Amber died. Right? And Amber died. And she is not the only example of somebody who has experienced that for all different stories, whether somebody wanted to go get an abortion in another state, whether somebody wanted desperately to be pregnant and had a complication. We're hearing so many stories of people who are pregnant who haven't even thought about abortion care and don't understand that these bans impact everyone who can get pregnant and want a healthy pregnancy in any way, shape, or form. So I think we continue to center those most impacted. We continue to remind ourselves that policy impacts real people, and we share their stories. There's so many. I mean, I'm thinking of Candy Miller. There's too many names that I can already tell you about since Roe has been overturned, since some of the states created these bans. And just to remind us that as we do this work, it is urgent. It's necessary, and the only way we move forward is by doing this in coalition together. And so I bet Ilana has some thoughts on that, so I'll turn it to her, but those are some of the things I'm keeping in mind.
No, I love the question, and Sheila, I love everything that you said, and you just perfectly set me up, because I mean, I think that, or you positioned me, not set me up, because I think that, you know, what I'm sitting here thinking is, what is the technology that then enables and allows us to do all of that? And I want to talk directly about DEI work. And, you know, if Sheila's gonna, you know, compel us all to make sure we communicate with our government today around equal rights, I want to compel us to double down on how we're thinking about and committing to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I want to say about it is at least three things. The technology of diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice will enable us to meet those goals of building unified community, of thriving and sort of coming out the other side of this in ways that we're stronger and have actually more facility to be ourselves as a multiracial, multi-faith, multi-gender nation, and also Jewish American community. And that technology of diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice is not kind of this banner that has, from my perspective, been, you know, I think in some ways unnecessarily or inappropriately criticized as sort of what's at fault for, you know, making Jewish Americans feel more targeted, for example, for failing to protect our young people on college campuses. The technology of diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice is actually what's allowed the Jewish community to survive for 5,000 years. It's what gives us the capacity to realize who we are as a multiracial nation, which requires us to understand ourselves as multiracial. It requires this country, the physics of this country requires us to be able to understand ourselves and thrive in that way. And so I would say, one, we need to, as a pragmatic and intellectual versus emotional exercise, understand the technology of diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice as verbs, not as taglines, not as things that we read about, but as actual verbs to enable ourselves to do those activities of being diverse, being inclusive, acting in ways that are equitable, modeling what justice looks like. I think we need to ask ourselves, for those of us who see ourselves outside of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, who see ourselves maybe even in conflict with the themes, which, if one sees oneself as in conflict, we have to ask ourselves where we see ourselves in terms of our own power and privilege. And I'm going to just say that again. If we see ourselves in conflict with diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice, then we have to ask ourselves how much privilege we see ourselves as having. And so we need to ask ourselves, if we're outside of it, how do we find ourselves outside of it? if we have a relationship with DEI where, for example, as funders, some of us have said, well, we've invested in it, and now that we need communities of color as our allies, that investment isn't paying off. Inside of that kind of mindset, we have to ask ourselves, again, how are we outside of it to where we invested in DEI but not see ourselves as part of it? And as a grant maker, you know, the Juice of Color, as a grant maker, I understand having a grant making strategy to achieve something in a field. But when we invest in our grantees so that they can realize our needs, when we invest in grantees so that they are an extension, or we expect them to be an extension of our needs rather in service to their mission, then we maybe have a difficult relationship with that kind of dynamic. And so we didn't invest in grantees of color, for example, so that they would be allies for us. We invested in them just to help them achieve our missions, their missions rather. And so I want to just really ask ourselves as funders, how do we locate ourselves in a dynamic, and is there a healthier place for us to be? And then third, we have to innovate on how we're thinking about diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. And what I mean by that is Jewish Americans have been and should have been part of the conversation all along. And when we did not see ourselves as vulnerable, we forgot to write ourselves in some ways. When we did not see ourselves as vulnerable, and that might have been because of how we perceived our racial location, our class location, when we did not see ourselves as vulnerable, we did not write ourselves in. And so we all need another go at our curriculum development around diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. That means we might have to reflect on the power and privilege dynamics of kind of DEI 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We should be like in 5 or 6 or 7.0 at this point. But when we do that, it will give us a new framework and a new container to work in coalition. And those coalitions are what's going to enable what Sheila so beautifully talked about.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ilana, and Sheila. I think something that's just sitting with me is this kind of need for us to go backwards and like re-look and deconstruct these terms, concepts, technologies that we've been using to make new meaning, to infuse them with new meaning so that we can move forward in a new context and a new point in time. And so I really appreciate that kind of lesson and call for all of us. Both of you spoke about this need to center the people who are most impacted by the work that we're doing. And I think my understanding, and again in the work of SRE as well, is that to center people who are most impacted, that means we both need to have a academic and intellectual knowledge of what their lived experience is like and how we understand what they go through every day, as well as to be in relationship with them and these communities. So I think my question for you raised it a little bit, but I want to say it more explicitly, is what are the areas of work that we need to like learn more about, right? That we need to read about, be more informed about. And when I say we, I mean practitioners who are doing this work, as well as funders who are investing in this work. What are the areas, the content areas in this moment that we really need to be more knowledgeable about? And who and what are the relationships that we need to be more deeply building to help us move forward? And Sheila, let's start with you again, and then Ilana.
I have too many thoughts to share in the limited time we have, but just want to say how beautiful of an answer that was from Ilana. Listen, I think everybody can always learn more on everything. That's for sure. There's no shortage. I think there's a responsibility we each have for ourselves in the way we carry and the organizations we represent, and for those funders here for the, you know, the way in which we operate. And I guess I just want to start there because I think it's easier and I think it gets skipped over a lot. So one, if you run an organization, do you have equal pay? Have you actually just looked? Have you looked at it by gender? I want to tell you, when I came into NCJW, we didn't have equal pay around gender, and we're like mostly women. You want to know why? Because the system is off and broken. And if you hire people in a way where they've all got percentage increases elsewhere and they come into you, then it's not like you're maliciously saying, I'm going to pay this person less because they're a woman or because they're Black or because of this. It is how the system has been designed. So we have to start by looking at what's in our control. When we made the decision to level salaries, I had to do that at the expense in hiring my own staff in the first year I was there. Because I was like, we have to model what it is that we say we care about. And any Jewish organization, and it's not a knock to who they are, but any organization is probably starting from a place where there's pay inequity in the organization. And it's one of the first things, and actually the easiest thing. Does it take money? Yes. Does it take a commitment to like getting a pool of money to start to level things out? Yes. And then you need salary bands, and then there's ways to keep it as you move forward. But I think there's a lot of these things that are considered small that have a massive impact in the lives of the people who work in our communities and are in our communities. So I would say look at pay, look at benefits. Look at benefits. Does everybody get paid family leave? Right. And let me just say this as somebody, Rachel, as you know, from my time at Hillel, as someone who covered 8 people's family leaves when I was at Hillel and doesn't have children myself, what also are you doing for the people who are taking on that work, right? Let people, have all the time they need, which is not a vacation, to raise their children, heal if they've had a pregnancy themselves. But also at NCJW now, we will give a bonus to the person who is taking the work on who while somebody is out. So those kinds of things to level the playing field, I think is something both that's so small but so big at the same time. And I would say to funders here, what percentage of money goes to women-led organizations? What percentage of that money goes to organizations that are actually working to improve the lives of women? Right? Same for our Jews of color and people of color. We've seen massive investments in the last decade around people of color, LGBTQ community. Good, keep it coming. And I want to just remind everybody that the women's space has been underfunded since forever. And it's underfunded in Israel. It's underfunded everywhere in the world. 2%, less than 2% of all dollars going to women-led organizations. We need bold people to treat some of these organizations and people. You got plenty. You got 3 CEOs right here. Whomever else, there's others on the call, to treat us the way they've treated the men, to say, look at your potential. Here's a multi-million-dollar gift to improve your organization. We haven't yet seen that, really, in the Jewish community for organizations impacting, whether it be women or any kind of marginalized group of people. We have seen some amazing, I think about Cindy at Repair the World and a lot of the big grants that she's received from big foundations. So there's great examples all around. There's never been a better time to be a woman and a woman in leadership in this time. And I still think the opportunity for everyone here is to look inward first. What's happening in your own organization? What's happening in your own foundation? What's happening if you belong to a synagogue there? Are any of these places that have only had men in leadership for like 100 years? Maybe we could think about that and think about what's happening that's leading that when 80% of the Jewish world, people who work here, are women, identify as women. And so it's not a shortage of interest. It's not a shortage of time. It's not a shortage of any of these things, but we have to ask that question. And I do think, particularly somebody who doesn't have kids, and I think it's important I say that, I think I've had opportunities as a result of people believing that I would spend more time on things because they didn't think I could be, distracted, putting the air quotes, I would never say that, by having kids. And I think we're also seeing a trajectory around that. And it's important to understand that there needs to be a belief in people who are able or choosing to be mothers or parents that matches those who aren't as well, and that nobody should be judged or held back based on the decisions that they're making around their families. And so that's where I would start. Like, people can read all the books they want and listen to the podcasts, but I would say we need a bigger investment in organizations impacting women right now, women, immigrants, trans community, people of color right now. Like, let's look at what the threats are in our country. We got to get this going. And for organizations like NCJW and other advocacy organizations, most of us are in the midst of moving from having previously only focused on federal advocacy to a state level. everything is now happening at the state. That means what we used to be able to do with 3 people in Washington, D.C., you need at least 50 people to do around the country. That requires an investment, infrastructure, engagement, training, leadership, more jobs and job opportunities to accomplish the same thing as before. That is a changing reality of a landscape in the last several years, as a lot of the things impacting women, children, and families, the LGBTQ community and immigration, are moving to the states. And so it's important to be aware of that trend for anybody who's thinking about how to make an impact. The landscape just changed. And this is what we're going to be navigating, I would say, at least the next 2 decades. So we do have to get set up differently for those things. So those are a little of my thoughts right now. I'm sure there are other ways people can learn and grow, but I would say be in relationship with the people doing this work again, and to make sure there are great people around. Like when I was recently, Schusterman had a gathering for some of the CEOs that they invest in, and it was like the most beautiful room I had ever seen. It was just like, it really felt like a full diversity. I know you can never have full, but it felt like if you were to look at the makeup of the Jewish community at large and percentage-wise put it out, women, men, age, gender, race, a variety of different things, they had it. And it was so exciting to be in that room, because most of the rooms I go to with the people making decisions of the Jewish community don't look like that. So I think there are people who have figured it out and are surrounding themselves and investing in a lot of the right people. And for the men who have the privilege to be in the positions that they're in too, to make sure there's space at the table for more. Like Evan Siegel is somebody I pay attention to a lot, a funder out in California who loves investing in women and just making sure that women-led organizations have what they need. And it's something that's so inspiring to me, because it's atypical. And who doesn't want that? Somebody, you know, who's a man saying, I'm going to invest in a women's organization, or somebody who's white investing in an organization focused on Jews of color, or whatever it might be. That's the best kind of allyship and solidarity that's out there for the people with capacity.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Ilana, I'm gonna let you respond to this question as well. And then the hour is quickly flying by. So actually, after you respond, Ilana, we're gonna move into breakout groups. And then we are gonna come back and have you guys answer one more question for us. But Ilana, if you wanna take it away.
Just like 3 brief things. I mean, everything that Sheila said, and then I'm gonna just put myself on a different side of the same set of answers, which is, one of the things I'd recommend is that we spend some time really interrogating the history of philanthropy in the US. And as funders and also as grantees, get into some honest dialogue about the dynamic and kind of the enterprise of philanthropy, where wealth for many funders in this country comes from. And if we actually talk about it as grantees and as funders, it puts sunshine on the dynamics related to power and privilege. And this entire conversation is about how we are conducting ourselves vis-a-vis power and privilege. And if we understand kind of the dynamics of philanthropy, and then how it plays out in terms of, you know, some folks are fans of trust-based philanthropy, other folks are fans of non-trust-based philanthropy. But if we actually talk about that within a context of things like race and gender and power and privilege, it will make for much healthier environments to be able to realize these kinds of ideas in terms of programs and initiatives and efforts that are in service to people in the field. I think the same kind of discipline should be explored around the history of the civil rights movement, particularly the relationship between Jewish Americans and Americans of color, and really talk about those dynamics, because I think if we better understood the history and if we better understood those dynamics, it would give us deep insight into what we're experiencing right now, and it would help us rethink our communal approach to navigating intercultural conflict, if you will, right now. And again, these are all about building our skills for being in relationship and realizing kind of the potential that we're all talking about. And then the last thing I want to say is, other thing I think we could have an opportunity to learn more about is, I wrote in the corner, like, hurt people. And on a very human, interpersonal level, we as humans, as individuals, particularly people with power and privilege, ourselves on the screen, we are the only people responsible for how we are experienced when we are conducting ourselves in our roles with our power. And we need to have, for me, my practice is around having an embodiment practice so that I understand when my biases are coming up, and they might come out as an expression of power that might be not in service to the work that we're doing in the field. And as leaders, in a time that is very, very difficult to lead, it is even harder to be tender and sensitive with how we are leading and our power that we're leading with. And the more we as humans can be in touch and responsible for ourselves, in touch with how it comes up and expresses from us. And I don't mean to be too, I'm sitting here in Berkeley, California. And so I think the more that we can sort of intersect our own sort of academic rigor with a sense of embodied practice around power, the healthier we will be as leaders and how we're conducting ourselves.
And Rachel, can I just add one thing? I know
Please.
I know we have to go, but I want to say this because I got two private notes. And so I want to just say out loud as before breakouts that like we have a president coming in, president we've had before, who was found liable by a New York jury for sexual abuse and defamation, who is now appointing people, and we'll see if they get confirmed. I think he's going to push them through in recess, so the process will be differently. He's now appointing people into high offices of power who have also been accused of sexual abuse. And it needs to be said right now, particularly I'm thinking of the Safety, Respect, Equity Network, of what it means when we're trying to figure out how to be working in government with people in these moments when there are people here who might not want to be alone with some of the people who are in these positions of power. And there is a feeling of threat and lack of safety for your body in a variety of different ways. And that makes this very complicated as we approach this next guy. I don't want to mean to say that it's the exact same the issues might be the same, but there are a lot of variables that make this very serious and worrisome for people who are here and the work they're in and the role they're in. And it doesn't feel random to be maybe we're having this conversation when last week we read the Torah portion about Dinah in the Torah. And I think what matters, and as we hold this and think about how we move forward, is, Dinah doesn't speak at all in that Torah portion. Everybody speaks for her, particularly the men. Her brothers speak for her, dad speaks for her, the perpetrator who's a prince. Imagine that, the person most in power, right? Speaks for her, but we don't hear her voice. And then we move on to the next Torah portion. Right. And so I think we're in this moment right now where that gets lost and is put as something that's small. That's the goal of perpetrators, to make something like that feel small and to make it so that the people who are victims or survivors don't have a voice. And so it's very, very important for us to continue in this coming year to talk about sexual violence as a Jewish community. We've done it a lot since October 7th. We need to do it a lot for what's happening here in this country. It is a health epidemic, 20% of women, and that's probably a underestimation. So just to some of the people who are chatting me privately, to everyone here, I know some people come to hear that, like, we see you, we believe you, we're with you, and we're also gonna, make sure to center survivors of sexual violence as we do this work ahead.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Ilana. So we are going to give folks a chance to talk with one another about what we just heard, what was shared, the brilliance of Sheila and Ilana, and all of the pearls of wisdom that you've just shared with us. And the questions we're going to ask you to talk about together is to briefly introduce yourselves. What is something that you heard that is resonating with you? What is a challenge that you want support from the group about, or something that you're wondering about? We will put those questions in the chat. We'll have about 6 minutes together before we come back and close with Sheila and Ilana. And thank you for the magic that will soon happen.
Thank you all. So I'm going to open up these breakout rooms, and they have the title, the name of the room is the intended audience. So please, when the room's open, choose the one that is relevant for you. We have more professionals than any other group in here, so we've divided you alphabetically. So please self-sort into a room, and you will be joined by somebody from either one of our speakers or our teams. And I'm going to let you go now because we're running out of time. There we go. And here comes everyone.
What a waterfall of faces. We have 4 minutes left, but I want to get this last question here because I think we all deserve to leave with a little hope before we turn it over to Rebecca. So Sheila and Ilana, on one foot, I hope all these conversations were so rich and there's so much work to do. Please leave us with a word of hope. What is the thing that is bringing you the most hope for the future right now? And then we'll close up.
I am inspired by all of us seeing if we can sort of shift our relationship to concepts of fear. I mean, I could, talk about people that make me hopeful or effort. Fundamentally, I think that the last, 18 months, the next 5 years give us all an opportunity to re-engage or newly engage with our relationship to fear. And I also know that for everyone on this screen, certainly having the privilege of leading with both Rachel and Sheila and others, that we have an enormous capacity that when we are in relationship to fear, but not acting because of fear, we have an enormous capacity to activate change. And I don't know what that capacity looks like right now. I don't know what the change will be, but what I know is that we get the choice to engage with the concept of fear in ways that make us bigger versus smaller. And we need all of us to be bigger out there. We have the privilege of working together as we expand out there. And to me, that's very energizing and exciting. And it's way better to think about than the alternative, so I'm going to choose optimism and leaning into expansiveness around fear.
Well, my breakout group, we were small but mighty, and but we had a special guest, and Ruth Messenger's great granddaughter Sophia Rose, who was just born, and so I've got to have hope because Sophia Rose needs to have a good future, and I learned from Ruth. That despair is not a strategy. So other day I was with Rabbi Dana Sorokin, and she talked about how if you walk past somewhere, you could kind of see and interpret. I can't go into a lot of things. She gave a great teaching that I'll try to get to you, but that it's important we both see the fire right now and how hard things are, and that we both see the light and the possibilities. And so I think we've got to have hope if we're going to be able to fight for a better future for Sophia Rose and for all of us on this call.
Thank you both so much for bringing your power and your light and shining it for all of us. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca and Sheena, I think, to close us out.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to take this moment to thank Ilana and Sheila and Rachel for leading us in a really strong, important conversation, helping to send us down the right paths in our thinking on how we can manage to have an impact over not just the next few months, but the next 4 years. As we all see, there is a tremendous amount of work to do. And I think as women, things are really important when we come together and find collaborations amongst ourselves, which is why at JFN, we were so happy to collaborate with SRE on this particular webinar and topic. And really my door is open. I am really happy to work with anybody who wants to help move these agendas forward. And thank you all so much for the time that you gave us today for participating in this webinar. Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays for everything that you're celebrating, and hold on to that hope because that's going to help drive us forward.